The first warning appeared 3 days before the eastern bridge collapsed. No one saw her write it. That was the thing about Vael. She moved through the castle like smoke through a keyhole, present only in the aftermath of her passing. A smear of red on the stone arch above the great hall's entrance. 7 words, uneven and dragging at the ends where her strength had given out. The bridge cannot hold another frost. The beta dismissed it as vandalism. He had it scrubbed before noon. The bridge collapsed on the 3rd morning, taking 2 packmates and a cartload of grain with it into the river below. No one connected the warning to the wall. No one thought to look for more. Vael had known they wouldn't. That was why she kept writing. She had been brought to Ashveil Keep 8 months ago by Alpha Rourke of the Cold March Pack. Not as a guest, not as a ward, but as something the pack had no clean word for. A charge. Maybe. A burden. She had belonged to the Cold March line through her mother, who had died when Vael was 4, and through a debt her father had owed that he'd never explained and never paid. When he vanished 6 winters later, the debt transferred to her. That was how it worked in packs that kept old law. She didn't speak. She hadn't spoken in 11 years. It wasn't that she couldn't, or at least that was what she told herself in the long, quiet hours before dawn. When the stone floor was so cold, it felt like sleeping on a frozen lake. The voice was still there. She could feel it sometimes, pressing against the back of her throat like a word she'd forgotten, halfway through saying. But silence had become her only armor a long time ago, and she'd worn it so long she was no longer sure where it ended, and she began. Rourke didn't care either way. A mute omega was a mute omega, useful enough for carrying, fetching, cleaning the parts of the keep that the others found beneath them. She was fed once a day, housed in a storage room off the lower kitchens, and largely left alone so long as she didn't make trouble. Making trouble, in Rourke's definition, included making eye contact, walking too slowly, being in a corridor when he wanted it empty, and existing in his peripheral vision in a way he found irritating. She had learned to be very small, but she could not stop seeing things. That was the curse, though curse wasn't quite the right word for it either. The seeing had always been with her, arriving like weather, sudden, uninvited, impossible to ignore. A shiver through her wolf, and then the image, clear and specific and absolutely certain. Not visions exactly. More like knowing, like finding a memory she hadn't made yet. She'd tried ignoring them once, at 11 years old, when she'd seen her father's horse throwing a shoe 3 days before a journey. She'd said nothing, and he'd fallen, and the horse had come back alone, and she'd understood then that the seeing was not something she was allowed to waste. She had no paper. No chalk, no charcoal from the fires, which were banked early and guarded by a senior packmate who liked to find reasons to report lower-ranked members for theft. She had her hand, the left one, which Rourke had broken 2 winters ago and healed badly, leaving 3 fingers fused at odd angles, and she had the other hand, which still worked, and she had the stone walls of a keep that stretched on longer than anyone seemed to know. The blood was an accident the first time. She'd split the skin on her knuckle against a rough edge of the kitchen shelf, and without thinking, she'd pressed her fingers to the wall beside the cold store and written what she was seeing. Salt stock is poisoned. Check the lower barrels. 2 packmates got sick that week. The lower barrels were chin was found. Still no one asked how the warning had gotten there. Still no one looked for her. And so she kept writing. She developed a system over the months. The warnings appeared in low places, knee height, ankle height, tucked into corners and behind doors that opened outward. Places where she could crouch and write in the 30 seconds she might have between one set of footsteps and the next. She rationed the blood carefully, a shallow cut along the edge of her palm, barely worth flinching at anymore, sealed quickly with pressure and the hem of her sleeve. She never signed her name. She never claimed the warnings as her own. She left them, and she watched, and sometimes they were heeded, and sometimes they weren't. And the ones that weren't heeded always came to pass exactly as she'd seen them. She had written 41 warnings by the time High King Aldrich arrived at Ashveil Keep. Vael first saw him from the upper kitchen window, a cortege of riders coming down the ridge road in the early grey of an October morning, the black and silver standard of the Ashveil High Court snapping in the cold wind. She counted 6 outriders, 2 advisers on pale horses, and 1 man at the centre who rode like he was born to take up space, tall in the saddle, dark-haired, the kind of stillness in his face that came not from calm but from control. Her wolf stirred. Vael pressed her palm flat against the window ledge and breathed through it. Her wolf stirred at inconvenient things, at storms before they arrived, at the particular quality of silence that preceded bad news. She had learned not to read too much into it. She went back to scrubbing the pots. The keep became immediately and completely different. Rourke's voice went 3 notes higher when he spoke to the king's people. The senior packmates who normally spent their mornings finding reasons to make her life difficult was suddenly occupied with linens and silverware and the precise arrangement of chairs in the great hall. Vael moved through the resulting gaps like she always moved, quietly along the edges, her eyes on the floor. She wrote 2 warnings that first night while the keep slept. The first was near the stables. The grey mare in the 3rd stall has colic beginning. See to her before dawn. The second was in the corridor outside the king's allocated chambers, low near the baseboard where the candlelight didn't reach. There is a man in this keep who does not belong to it. He arrived 3 days before the king and he is waiting. She pressed her palm to her sleeve and went back to the kitchen. She didn't see who found them. She never saw who found them. That was the arrangement she had with herself. Write and leave, like depositing something in a river and trusting the current. But this time, something was different. She was carrying water from the lower well when she heard voices in the side passage, 2 of the king's advisers, their words clipped and low. She stopped without meaning to. "He's been cataloguing them," one was saying. "The ones in the east corridor, the one near the barracks, the 3 in the lower kitchen. That's not possible." They said the walls were scrubbed regularly. "The recent ones haven't been touched. They're Gavin. They're sequential. Someone has been leaving warnings in this keep for months, and every single one of them has corresponded to an incident that was documented after the fact." A pause, then the other voice, quieter. "Aldrich's not going to let this go. No, he's not." Vael set the water pail down very carefully and took a different route back to the kitchen. That evening, she saw the king himself crouched in the east corridor. She came around the corner without thinking. She'd taken the short route out of habit, the one that cut behind the grain store, and stopped so fast she nearly stumbled. He was at the far end of the passage, candlestick in one hand, crouched low against the baseboard, studying the wall with the kind of focused attention that made her stomach drop. He looked up before she could back around the corner. They stared at each other across 15 feet of stone corridor. Aldrich. She knew him from the packs murmuring, from the way Rourke said his name like a word he was tasting carefully, was younger than she'd expected. 30, perhaps, or close to it. He had a quality of watchfulness that she recognized, the kind that came from long practice, from learning to see everything in a room before committing to being in it. His eyes moved over her once, measured and quick, and then dropped back to the wall. "You can go," he said, not dismissive, almost careful why. Something in her wolf was very still. Something in her wolf was very still, the way animals went still just before something changed. "The handwriting," he said. "The handwriting," he said, "on the wall here. Do you know who made it?" She held his gaze. She did not answer. She was acutely aware of her ruined hand, of the ink-dark bruise still fading along her jaw from 3 days ago, of the fact that she was standing in a corridor she was technically not permitted to use after the evening bell. Something shifted in his face. "You have blood on your sleeve," he said, quietly. "Left cuff." She looked down. She did. A thin smear, barely visible on the dark fabric from this morning's cut. When she looked up again, he was watching her with an expression she didn't have a word for yet. "The warnings," he said. "Someone in this keep has been writing them for months. Specific, accurate warnings, written in blood, left in locations where they'd be found but not easily attributed. He paused. Every incident they predicted came to pass. Every single one. She didn't move. "I've been trying to find a pattern," he said, looking back at the wall. "In the placement, the timing, but there's something else." He held the candle closer to the baseboard. In 41 warnings, the same sequence of letters appears. Not words, just letters, distributed through the messages at irregular intervals. If you pull them out in order, he touched the wall, gently, tracing something she couldn't see from here. They spell a name, the same name 41 times, hidden in the warnings like a message inside a message. Vael's breath went very still in her chest. She hadn't known she'd done it. She had not known. It had happened the way the warnings themselves happened, not planned but necessary, the hand moving before the mind could catch it. Her name, buried in 41 warnings across 8 months of stone walls, hidden so deep even she hadn't seen it. Vael. Her name, her real name, not the diminutive the pack used when they addressed her at all. The name her mother had given her, the one that appeared in no pack records because her records had been altered when she arrived, the one that was connected to a line of Ashveil wolves that had nothing to do with Rourke or Coldmarch or the debt her father had supposedly owed. She understood, all at once, why the seeing had brought her to Ashveil Keep. Not to serve, not to disappear, to be found. Aldrich straightened slowly. He was looking at her, not the way people in this keep looked at her, through or past or down, but at, direct and held, like she was a problem he wanted to solve correctly. "The name," he said, "Vael." He said it the right way, with the stress on the first syllable, the way her mother had said it. "Do you know why that name would appear in these messages?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then, very slowly, she raised her right hand, the good one, and pressed it flat against her chest. His eyes didn't leave her face. "You," lowered her hand. The silence between them was different now, full of something that was reorganizing itself. "Rourke told me you couldn't communicate," Aldrich said. Not accusatory, like he was verifying a map against the actual territory. "He said you'd been mute and unresponsive since your arrival." She looked at him steadily. "He also told me your name was Senna and that you'd come to Coldmarch by choice." Something went cold in her chest. Not surprise. She had known that whatever name they'd given her wouldn't be her own. But hearing it said out loud, Senna, a name she'd never answered to in her head, a name like a door locked from the outside, made it solid in a way it hadn't been before. Aldrich turned to face her fully. He was very still now. "I need you to understand something," he said. "Whatever is happening in this keep, whatever has been done here, to the records, to the pack structure." He stopped. Started again. "The name Vael is not a Coldmarch name. It's not even an Ashveil common name. There is exactly one lineage in this entire region that uses it, and that lineage has been missing a daughter for 11 years. The stone floor felt very far away beneath her feet. "Your mother," Aldrich said, and his voice went careful in a way that told her he already knew the answer. "Was she from the Oldenmoor line?" Vael's wolf rose up inside her chest like a tide coming in. For the first time in 8 months, for the first time in longer than that, the wolf did not feel small. It felt like something vast and ancient straightening its spine. She gave the smallest possible nod. Aldrich closed his eyes for 3 seconds. When he opened them, the expression on his face was not pity, which she'd expected, and not shock, which she'd braced for. It was something fierce and controlled. The face of someone who had just identified a wrong and was already 3 steps into figuring out how to correct it. "You have been in this keep for 8 months, he said. "As what, exactly? What does Rourke call your role here?" She looked at him. She let him see her ruined hand, her jaw, the sleeve with its stain. His jaw went hard. "Right," he said. "Right." He didn't ask her why she hadn't told anyone. She was grateful for that. The answer was exhausting, because no one asked, because there was no one to ask, because the only power she'd had was the warnings, were already more than she'd been sure she could get away with. And she was very tired. "I'm going to need you to stay in the keep tonight," he said. "Not in the lower kitchens. There are guest quarters on the second corridor. I'll have them prepared. I need to speak with my advisor, and then I need to look at something in the pack registry, and in the morning I need you where I can find you." She studied him. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said, reading her correctly. "I'm asking you to make a calculated decision. You've been making them for 8 months. Make one more." She thought about it. She thought about 41 warnings pressed into stone walls while the pack slept around her. She thought about her mother's name, said correctly, by a man she'd met 10 minutes ago in a dark corridor. She nodded once. Something moved in his face, not quite relief, but the shape of it. "Good," he said. "Don't scrub the walls. Leave everything exactly as it is." He paused on his way past her. "Vael," he said, trying the name again like he was making sure of it. She met his eyes. He held her gaze for a moment, and then he walked back toward the main corridor, and she listened to his footsteps until they faded. She stood in the dark passage for a long time after. Her wolf was doing something she didn't have a word for, not howling, not straining, not the restless circling she'd grown used to. Just present, settled, like something that had been waiting for a very specific thing, and had finally, after a very long time, found it. She did not go back to the kitchens that night. What happened over the following 3 days would later be described, in the official High Court record, as an administrative correction of pack registry fraud. That was the clean language, the language that fit in a ledger. The real version was messier and longer, and involved Aldrich's senior advisor spending 16 hours cross-referencing birth records with land titles and pack lineage documents that Rourke had clearly hoped no one would think to pull. The Aldenmore line was not extinct, as the records currently claimed. The last heir had been redirected, illegally, under duress, using a forged debt document, into Coldmark's custody 11 years ago, at age 9, following the death of her mother and the manufactured disappearance of her father. The heir had been kept under a false name. Her wolf, which should have manifested fully by her late teens, had been suppressed through a combination of isolation, malnourishment, and a particular kind of sustained social violence that didn't leave records but left other things. Aldrich read all of it. He read it in one sitting, late at night, with his advisor across the table and the documents spread between them, and then he sat very still for a while with his hands flat on the table. In the morning, he had Rourke brought to the council room. Vael was not in the council room. She was in the upper corridor, and the walls were thick, but sound carried strangely in old stone keeps, and she heard enough, not everything, but enough. She heard Rourke's voice go from confident to defensive, to something she'd never heard from him before, a high, tight sound that made her wolf go very calm. She heard Aldrich's voice, which did not rise once. That was, she thought, the more frightening thing. Rourke was stripped of his alpha status before noon. His senior packmate, the one who'd guarded the fires, the one who'd filed reports, was removed alongside him. The High Court's authority to make those designations was not questioned. No one in the pack questioned it. Several of them looked, if Vael was being honest, like people who had been waiting for someone to come along and do exactly this. She spent that afternoon sitting in the guest corridor with her back against the wall and her knees up and her good hand wrapped around a mug of tea that someone, she still didn't know who, had left outside her door. The tea was hot. That was still surprising to her. Hot food, hot drink, delivered without demand or condition. Her wolf kept doing that thing she didn't have a word for. Aldrich found her there near evening. He sat down on the floor beside her, which was not what she'd expected. He had the posture of someone who made a habit of sitting on floors when the occasion called for it, unself-conscious, easy. "The Aldenmore land is in the northern reach," he said. 3 days' ride. It's been in trust with the High Court since your mother's death, waiting for a confirmed heir. He looked at her sideways. "That's you, in case the documentation wasn't sufficiently persuasive." She looked at her mug. "There's a house," he said, "the old kind, built into the rock, with the kind of garden that takes 50 years to establish and then doesn't stop. Your great-aunt planted it, apparently. The records say it blooms in October. A pause. It would be blooming now. She felt something happen in her throat, something that might have been the thing that had been pressed behind it for 11 years, starting, very cautiously, to move. You don't have to decide anything tonight, he said, or tomorrow. The legal process takes time regardless, and I'm not going anywhere for another week. He shifted slightly against the wall. But I wanted you to know the title transfers with the land. Alpha status, your own territory. You'd answer to the High Court like any other alpha, which in practice means me, which in practice means almost no interference at all, provided you're not poisoning your pack's salt stock or letting bridges collapse. She made a sound. She hadn't meant to. It came out strange, slightly broken, the sound of someone who had not laughed in a very long time and whose body was uncertain of the mechanics. Aldrich turned to look at her. She felt heat in her face. She looked away. That's the first sound I've heard you make, he said. Not a criticism, something much more careful. She kept looking at the opposite wall. He didn't push. He also didn't leave. They sat in the corridor while the light moved and the sounds of the keep settled around them, and after a while she became aware that her wolf had stopped doing the wordless thing and started doing something with more weight to it. Something that pooled low in her chest and moved outward from there, and had nothing to do with warnings or lineage, or what had been taken from her. She set that aside. There was already enough to carry. The walls, she said. Her voice came out like something that had been stored in a cold room too long, rough, slightly uncertain, the consonants landing a beat behind where she'd placed them. 11 years of silence, and it sounded exactly like that. She'd expected worse. Aldrich went completely still beside her. The warnings on the walls, she said. There are 2 more. I wrote them last week. No one has acted on them yet. He turned to face her. His expression was doing something she still didn't have a clean word for. Tell me, he said. She told him. Her voice found its footing as she talked, not smoothly, not the way it would have at 20 if she'd kept it, but forward, at least, moving. There was a leak in the eastern cistern that would worsen with the freeze. There was a young packmate, barely 14, who had taken to sleeping in the stables to avoid someone in the main keep, and the winter was only getting colder. Aldrich listened to all of it without interrupting. He asked one question, the location of the second warning. She described it. He nodded. I'll have both addressed tonight, he said. She nodded. He did not ask how she knew. She appreciated that more than she could have put into words, which, given the circumstances, felt appropriate. The winter garden at Aldenmoor was nothing like the stone floors of Ashveil Keep. She would not see it for another 3 weeks. The legal process took the time. Aldrich had said it would, and the 3-day ride north happened on a morning cold enough that her breath came out in pale clouds. But when she arrived, the gate was open. The garden was still blooming, barely October fading into November, the last of it catching the frost. She stood at the gate for a long time. Her wolf stood with her, full and present and not small at all. Aldrich was 3 feet behind her, having ridden alongside without comment for 3 days, which had told her more about him than anything documented in the High Court records. She took a step through the gate and another. The cold air came in off the northern hills, and the garden smelled like frost and green and something older, stone and earth, and the particular quality of a place that has been tended with love for 50 years and has not forgotten it. She stopped in the center of it. Her voice came out clear this time, unprompted, offered. My mother used to say that a garden either knows you or it doesn't, she said. You can't convince it. Aldrich stopped beside her. And, he said, she looked at the last blooming things, frost-edged and still holding. I think it knows me, she said. Behind them, the gate swung gently in the northern wind, and her wolf lifted its head, and somewhere in the old stone walls of the house her great-aunt had built, something long held let go.